All right, now that I'm unmuted, welcome everybody to our virtual lobby day for education justice in the 88th Texas legislative session of 2023. Before we begin, just want to do a short introduction about Texas Appleseed. So Texas Appleseed promotes social, economic, and racial justice for all Texans by leveraging the skills and resources of volunteer lawyers, other professionals, and community partners to identify practical solutions to difficult and systemic problems. We have a wide variety of issues that we address, from education justice to criminal justice to fair housing, fair financial access, you name it. We're looking at various institutions and proposing policy recommendations to address a lot of the practices in those institutions. Our agenda for today is we will cover the education justice legislative priorities at the Texas legislature, how to make an impact. We'll open up for Q&A, any questions that you all might have, then conduct a call to action and walk you all through how to email your legislative representatives, how to call them, and of course, how to do a social media blast, whether it be on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And then of course, highlight ways that you can stay involved through this legislative session. Now that we'll move on to the actual portion of this webinar, and our Education Justice Director, Andrew Hairston, will go deeper into the legislative priorities in this legislative session for education justice. I will hand it over to him.
Thank you so much, Kristian. Welcome everyone to our virtual lobby day on education justice. My name is Andrew Hairston. I direct the Education Justice Project at Texas Appleseed and have done so since 2019. We can move to the next slide. So we contextualize a lot of our work within the history of education justice advocacy in the United States, thinking about really the unmet promise of Brown v. Board of Education, which celebrates its 69th anniversary next month. So a number of young people in the American South were lifting up their voices against racial injustice some 75 years ago, and really demanding that their school boards and their state legislatures invest in schools in a way that met the needs of young people, and to adequately desegregate these schools to make sure that equal educational opportunities would be available for all. As we proceeded through the latter half of the 20th century, we certainly had some momentous civil rights gains, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but there also was a backlash to that participation of young people in the process, right? Both demanding their school boards and their legislatures and even Congress to adequately fund education. And so you'll see a few examples here of how young people were really actively engaged and have been for decades in the fight for education justice, making sure that racial justice, LGBTQ equality, and disability justice are a part of the curricula in their schools. And again, the backlash is very evident in how certain legislators have responded and tried to use zero tolerance policies and school policing to hinder the voices of young people. We can go to the next slide. So in 3 years, we've seen a lot of activity in the world, right? The coronavirus pandemic has certainly very much so illustrated how advocacy has moved over the past 3 years, that folks have had to be very nimble to address the concerns that have popped up in their local communities and in their states and across the country and the world during this time. And folks will remember the collective action that sprouted from George Floyd's murder in May of 2020, and the incredible momentum that took place after that for school policing to be examined as the deeply harmful institution that it is, and for a number of local school boards across the country to reconsider their relationships with school police departments, either their internal school police departments or the contracts they had with local police departments. So in June 2020, the Oakland Unified School District determined that the George Floyd resolution was worth its vote and its support, right? That moved to disband the Oakland Unified School Police Department, a really incredible victory registered. And in efforts, let's say in Denver, to end the school to prison pipeline, there was a vote from the Denver Public Schools Board in June of 2020 to move away from its relationship with the Denver Police Department. I want to say that even as we registered these victories, almost immediately, let's say during the 2020-2021 academic year, these school boards started to move back from those really historic commitments they made to leave school policing behind. You can go to the next slide. So again, there are even more examples, even in larger cities. Certainly, Houston as a large city can be an example here. Chicago and Los Angeles throughout the pandemic have had really dedicated youth organizers calling for the end of school policing or a significant reimagining of how education dollars are spent on their local classrooms and their local campuses. And in Chicago, we saw a divestment of over $18 million from the Chicago Police Department and that contract that that department had with the Chicago Public Schools in August 2020. And then in February of 2021, a number of Los Angeles students won a major budget cut of $25 million to the LA Unified School Police Department. So again, even as this backlash was unfolding, still the momentum occurred that young people were being taken very seriously and certainly were representing that long history of struggle, like the young people in the 1960s and the 1970s, demanding that racial justice be a core part of the curriculum in schools. So now we've moved up to the 88th legislative session. For folks who have been tuned into the news or who have potentially gone to the building over the past 3.5 months, it's been a pretty grueling session, right? There's been a large push to return to zero tolerance policies and to speak about young people in these ways that I would say pathologize them, to try and make them responsible for the woes that they face and the societal failures that they're contending with, rather than addressing those institutions that Kristian mentioned in our introduction and giving young people the real ability to thrive. So we have focused on 4 main areas in our education justice priorities. The first is curbing school policing, and this has been very prominent after Uvalde nearly a year ago. So we saw that there were hundreds of police officers from various agencies on the campus of Robb Elementary 11 months ago, and they were completely ineffective in preventing that shooting from occurring and were around for an hour while it did occur. And we very much so want to take that narrative and continually put it before legislators that school policing is not synonymous with school safety, that to build truly safe and supportive school environments, you have to invest on the front end in mental health services and supports and professionals for young people to make sure that they have these environments where they really feel like they can thrive, where they can build relationships with each other and with the adults who are charged with their care, and really try to build with each other the school environments that they've long been deprived of, but that they deserve. I mentioned the mental health professions. We have for years been examining how a number of school districts across the state do not have the adequate number of school mental health professionals to students, right? So for the 3 main buckets, counselors, psychologists, and social workers, for counselors, that association generally recommends that there be 1 school counselor for every 250 students. For psychologists, that association recommends that there be 1 psychologist for every 600 students. And for school social workers, that association recommends that there be 1 social worker for every 400 students. And again, virtually no school and no school district in Texas meets those recommended ratios of school mental health professionals to young people. So we think that could be a really significant fix. And we had some commitments in the 87th session during 2021 to use some of the stimulus money from the federal government during the pandemic to fund mental health professions, but it was only a drop in the bucket, and there needs to be more investment to really meet the needs of young people on the campuses. We can move forward. Trauma-informed resources are already in a very much so a significant way that we think about our advocacy at the state legislature, that you can't divorce the activity that's going on in schools right now from the coronavirus pandemic and its very negative effect on young people over the past 3 years. Even before the pandemic, young folks were dealing with so many raw emotions based on the deeply unequal society in which they live and seeing how their peers were being mistreated. This is a very important way to push for legislators to acknowledge that long history of struggle and to put materially beneficial resources onto school campuses to make sure that young people feel fully heard and seen. And then finally, in our recommendations, and a lot of our work over the past decade in trying to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, we focused on local initiatives that have gained steam. One example is HB 674 from 2017 that banned pre-K through 2 suspensions for young people across the state of Texas, and that passed during that legislative session 6 years ago. And that activity started with local school boards in Austin, Dallas, and Houston. Currently, we're looking at a program called the Reset Room Initiative in Dallas ISD that was proposed after George Floyd and the racial justice protests of 2020, and that's been unfolding for the past few academic years, that proposes an alternative to exclusionary discipline for the young people in Dallas, that instead of putting kids into a disciplinary alternative education program or suspending them after behavior like a fight, they would be given the opportunity to go to a reset room, cool off, maybe watch some music, and then go back to their classroom and have minimal disruption of their school day. We think that if properly implemented, that type of program has incredible potential, not only for young people in Dallas, but for millions of young Texans. And we're hoping that the legislature will consider those types of initiatives. Those are the broad priorities. Now, kind of thinking about school safety in this session, I want to kind of go through over the past month what we have been fighting in the legislature. There are 3 primary committees that entertain the bills that we're interested in: the Senate Education Committee, the House Public Education Committee, and the House Select Committee on Youth Health and Safety. My colleagues and I have been at the Select Committee on Youth Health and Safety quite a bit over the past month. We first were there on March 20th to oppose HB 655, which would classify young people as habitually violent across the state for a number of reasons that we uplifted through our testimony. That speaks to the history of calling young people super predators and treating them as if, again, they are responsible for the woes that they face in society and not the society itself that is creating those deeply entrenched inequalities. And then on the 27th of March, we were there to oppose HB 3, which proposed a number of ramped up investments in school security officials in schools across the state. For HB 655, that's been left pending in the Select Committee, and HB 3 was voted out this week. But I think that these bills, even if they do move forward, if you have a unified front and if you speak very passionately about your experience, especially as young people, you can have a tremendous impact on how these bills do or don't move forward. I'm going to now pass it to Uyiosa to talk about making an impact.
All right, thank you for being patient with me. I'm gonna go ahead and talk to you all about how we can actually make an impact on many of the different topics that Andrew just discussed, and others that you may be interested in. So next slide. So it's important before we even start to understand what takes place in the state capitol in Austin. So one thing to understand is that whenever an idea comes about, there are two different places that it can come by. So you have two different types of elected officials in the state of Texas. You have your House of Representatives, you have your representatives, and you have your state senators, right? So there's a lot of differences between these two different types of elected officials. One thing notable is that state senators cover a larger population in the state of Texas than House of Representatives. So for example, for folks in Houston, that you may be aware of State Senator Boris Miles. He represents more people than, let's say, an example, Representative Alma Allen, right? Who many folks know here in Houston. So whenever an idea is proposed, it has to be accepted by those two bodies of elected officials, right? So a House representative is going to write a bill that is going to start in the committees. It's going to be heard, it's going to be discussed. The public is going to come through and give their own comment on whether they support or disagree with certain aspects of that bill. It may be amended during that time. And if the House committee says yes, because there are several different committees, if they say yes, that this needs to be brought to the bigger floor for every single representative to discuss and debate, then it'll go to it'll get through the calendar and get to the floor, and they'll debate it over time. And if they agree, then it'll be sent to the governor's desk on their end. But that's not the end of it, right? Because we have the other chamber, right? We have the state senators as well, who go through the pretty much exact same process, right? They have their own committees as well, right? So they're going to hear the equivalent, the Senate equivalent of the bill, and we'll discuss the differences between those in a bit. And they're going to go through their committees. They're going to go through their own process of hearing public comment, amending, and changing. And if those Senate committees agree to this bill going to the entire group of senators, state senators, then that will happen. So let's look at the timeline of how this looks, right? So we are, the legislative session happens every 2 years, right? So this is a really important time. A lot of bill filings took place earlier this year. And we're at a moment where a lot of committees are hearing bills and discussing whether or not they should go to the floor. So we're dead set in the March, April, May timeline, where bill amendments are proposed and voted on committee members. And if they're passed by majority, they're going to move on to different calendars and then onto the different floors, right? So this is the time for, if you're a resident in the state of Texas, this is the time to really make your voice heard on any bill that is important to you. After floor action takes place and they're discussed on the floors, then they're going to go to the governor's desk for him to sign. That's if both chambers, both the House of Representatives and the Senate chambers decide that it is worthy of going to the governor after all sorts of debate, after all sorts of public comment, after all sorts of amendments. And all of these, and of course, all of these bills will go into effect in September. That's how it normally goes. So there's several different ways to get involved, right? So I just went through all the context of what's going on and how this works. And we have a couple ways to get involved. One, and the most important thing, is that you gotta talk to your representatives, right? So that means going in person to the Capitol, and if not, making those phone calls, sending emails because they do read those emails, and also writing personal letters and mailing them yourself if you're capable of doing that. All of these different ways of contacting your representatives actually matter because they have staff in the office who have to read these messages and report immediately to the representatives once they take place. So this is one of the most important ways to get involved. And followed by that, you can submit public comment and testimony. This is in person at the Capitol. There are ways to do that. And if you're very interested, definitely sign up on the lower right hand of your screen so you can get involved in getting to Austin and getting your voice heard. But this is something that is pretty much relegated to in person. You should also share whenever anyone else is doing something, right? So whenever you see someone telling their story, or they have advocacy events or rallies or anything that's taking place, and you're on social media, you should know that your own followers care about what you care about. So when you share that and you put that in front of them, it's going to make it even more likely that they're going to take part in that advocacy as well, or even change their minds, right? So that can look like social media sharing. That can look like even making blog posts or writing articles, sharing newsletters of any advocacy groups that you're already a part of, or even tuning in on the radio, or even getting on the radio and discussing matters that are important to you, because there are plenty of radio stations that allow call-in. You could also join one of these advocacy groups that I just discussed. There are plenty of organizations that Texas Appleseed is partnered with, and they provide so many legislative updates. We provide all sorts of notices on bills that are extremely important on our end, or we can get you connected with other partners that are involved in several different topics, not just education justice. It could be criminal justice. It could be fair housing. It could be all sorts of different things. A lot of the times, these advocacy groups also have action alerts. So when you sign up and there's something that important happens, you'll get a ping in your email and you'll get notified that, hey, this bill is moving, and you really should get active on it. And then lastly, if you're able to and you're able to make that trek, you should attend events at the state capitol. That looks like engaging in any of the briefings or hearings that they have, the public hearings that you're allowed to sit in on and even speak on as well. You should attend any sort of rallies or lobby days, rallies where those big events where people are outside and there's press conferences and people are sharing their stories. Those matter, and representatives really do see that. Lobby days look like you coming with a group and strategically going to the offices that align or misalign with the bills that you want to get some impact on. So there are so many different ways to get involved. And it's important to engage as many that you're able to in your own capacity. So next slide. I'll pass it off to our Director of Community Outreach, Kristian Caballero.
All right, thank you, Uyiosa and Andrew. This is a great time if there are any questions at this point, whether it's some of the legislative priorities that Andrew went over, or some of the advocacy tips that Uyiosa shared. Please go ahead and put those in the chat or in the Q&A box, depending on how you're connected right now, whether that's through Zoom or Facebook. Encourage you all to submit questions at any point in time. Looks like we don't have any as of right now, so we'll go ahead and continue to move forward, but we're going to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A box for any questions, and then try to seamlessly answer questions throughout the rest of the webinar as they come up. So for now, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Mayra, who will help conduct our call to action. And here we go.
Hi, everyone. I am Mayra Fierro, Community Outreach Organizer based in Dallas, and I'm excited to share with you all how we can take action today. We can go to the next slide. So one of the bills that we wanted to share with you all today is HB 2451, which is seeking to amend the education code to allow school safety funds to be used for mental health purposes. It would create mental health funding to be able to provide services, emotional and psychological support for students with mental health or substance use conditions, and that would, of course, promote a positive schooling climate. So one of the ways, as we heard from Uyiosa, that we can take action is by actually contacting our representatives, which is what we would like to ask you guys to do today. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by sending an email. Can I get the next slide? And what we've done is we have gathered the email addresses for the members of the Youth Health and Safety Select Committee. And I have put their pictures right there next to them so you can see who those representatives are. And we've also prepared an email template. So in the chat, we'll be dropping in a link to a template that you are able to use to start your email. And we've also listed the emails on that template. So what I'd like to ask you all to do is to take a few minutes and actually send a couple of emails out to the representatives, asking them to put HB 2451 on the schedule for a hearing. And actually, before we get into all that, I see that there's quite a few folks on Zoom. If you guys on Zoom wouldn't mind, in the chat, is there anybody here who has never advocated or contacted the representative before? Sorry, y'all. I'm dropping that link in the chat for you all. There we go. Now everybody should have access to this document. So this document has the bill summary at the top that you just guys saw on the last slide. It also has the contact information for each one of the committee members. It includes their full name, the phone number, email, and Twitter handles. The links that are included are actually to their profiles. And then if you were to click on the link for HB 2451, there is also the actual bill text. So at this point, I'd like to ask you guys to take a moment and draft some emails to your representatives. And then once you have sent an email, if you could please just let us know by dropping an email emoji in the chat.
All right, well, we give people some time to do that action and email those committee members. It looks like we got one question submitted through Facebook chat from M. Anthony Miranda. He asks, what of calendar committees? What can one do as a legislative bill sits there? So once the committee actually passes a bill and it moves on to calendars, it'll sit in calendars until it's put on the agenda for the House or the Senate floor. Sometimes they'll stay sitting there because, depending on the time frame and what else is put on the agenda, some bills might not ever actually be able to move forward. So the best thing to do while a bill is sitting in calendars, waiting to be scheduled to be put on the House or Senate floor, I would highly encourage you to contact your legislative representatives and urge them to contact calendars and get them to put that on the agenda for the House or the Senate, depending on what the bill is. I don't know if Andrew, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summation, Kristian. What I will mention is that because of capacity, we have primarily focused on school safety issues this session, but there have been a number of issues that have come up of concern to education justice. One was flagged by a partner in Houston, Leadership for Educational Equity, SB 8, which moved through the Senate Education Committee and is known as the Parental Bill of Rights. It was proposing educational savings accounts, also known as vouchers, right? And we are generally in support of a very robust quality public education at Texas Appleseed, right? And have concerns with how that's moving through the process. But something like SB 8 might kind of move in the next few weeks through that calendars process, and that might be something to monitor. And I'll mention from that partner, Leadership for Educational Equity, there's an event on Wednesday, April 19th at 5 p.m. They'll be co-hosted by Raise Your Hand Texas, that I'm happy to share more information about. But, around school safety issues and other education justice issues of concern, this next month will be a period of great activity for all of it.
Awesome. And I'm starting to see that those email emojis are starting to come in. I appreciate that. All right, y'all, we're just gonna give it just a few more minutes, let folks wrap up their emails. I still want to see the emojis, drop them in there. I'm excited to see them going out. Awesome, everyone. I'm excited to see all those emails went out. Let's keep it moving and let's contact our representatives in another way. If I could please get the next slide. And now I'd like to ask you guys to help me make some calls. So just like with the emails, we've prepared kind of like a little template. You're always more than welcome to change it up and of course, craft your own message, use your own voice, your own experiences and your own stories. We've kind of just created a guide to help you get started. And then of course, their phone numbers are listed right there next to them. And then this time, instead of dropping an email emoji, if you could drop a phone emoji after you've made some calls. And then of course, if you actually do get some questions from some of the representatives or their staffs, please feel free to drop them back in the chat. We'd love to know what kind of questions that they have or how what are other ways that we can help support. And for folks that maybe just joined us, we are making calls to our representatives, asking them to schedule Bill HB 2451 for a hearing. And we are dropping in a phone emoji to show that we have already made our phone calls. Awesome. I'm starting to see the phone emojis come in the chat. And again, folks, if you actually do get through to a representative or even their staff members and you are able to have a conversation with them, we would love to know what it is that they said. Gonna give folks just one more minute to wrap up their calls and then we'll move on to our next action. All right, folks, as you wrap up them calls, I'm gonna go ahead and switch our slide. And this time I'd like to ask everybody to, well, the slideshow says tweet, but I recognize that everybody doesn't use Twitter. I'm actually one of those people. So I put together the actual Twitter handles for the representatives. And those are all valid. You might be able to go on their profile and see that some of them don't have a lot of activity. So what I would suggest is that if you use a certain platform, whether it be Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, you can go ahead and find your representative and go ahead and follow them that way. But if you want to send a message, I would say that the tweets and Facebook are probably the most effective ways to do it on social media platforms. And for these, we've also generated some scripts, and I'm going to drop those actual texts into the chat so you all can copy and paste those. Gotcha. And if you guys want, I do see the message that some folks are having trouble getting it off the slides. I'm going to drop and I'm going to copy and paste the Twitter handles as well into the chat right now. You're also able to find their Twitter handles on the actual email and call script template that we shared earlier that I'll also share again now. Okay, folks. And then like we did with the emails and the phone calls, after you send a tweet, if y'all could just drop an emoji in the chat, let us know. Hey, y'all, been on mute. But anyways, I was sharing that I am excited to know that we have now called, emailed, and tweeted our representatives today in hopes to get HB 2451 finally scheduled for a hearing. How does everyone feel? And at this point, I think I'd like to go ahead and pass it off back to Kristian.
All right, thanks, Mayra. All right, well, now that we've conducted that call to action, you guys emailed, you guys called, posted on social media, all of those tools are incredibly helpful when it comes to amplifying anything that you're advocating for. So I'm glad that you guys joined us virtually to conduct that action, and I encourage you all to share those actions with other people. It doesn't have to just be today. It could be done later today, tomorrow, and even next week. You know, we have quite a few days left in this legislative session. And so we're going to continue to need all of you to keep engaging and help amplify a lot of these things that we're advocating for. Just to highlight some of the resources that were shared today, and again, feel free to share these resources with others. You know, we have some of the resources as far as education advocacy is concerned, you know, the legislative priorities that Texas Appleseed is focusing on. We have a really great education justice blog that breaks down a lot of these issues. There's also the Police Free Schools campaign, which is a great resource. Texas Legislative Education Equity Coalition, hosted by IDRA. Definitely recommend looking into that. And then, of course, we added the bill summary and script that we shared with you all earlier for future reference if you're going to get other people to, you know, do those actions as well. Highly encourage you all to do that. And then, of course, we have the Texas legislative resources here where you can track bills, get updates on the bills as they're moving through the legislative session. If you don't know who your representatives are, that's a great link too. Click on that, make sure you know who your representatives are and keep in contact with them. And then we have the Texas House Public Comment link, which for those of you that aren't able to make it to the Capitol in person, which we know is an incredible privilege that not everybody can afford, you can still submit public comment online remotely, and that's the link to do it through. And then I would just close with our contact information. Everybody that spoke during this webinar, from our Education Justice Director, Andrew Hairston, myself, Kristian, the Community Outreach Director, and Mayra and Uyiosa, who are community organizers based in Houston and Dallas. And of course, all of our social media handles as well down below. Please feel free to follow us and repost anything that Texas Appleseed posts. And also get alerts from us by signing up with our newsletter. And then if you do want to get more involved in advocacy work and different actions, especially at the Capitol, whether it's in person or remotely, feel free to click on the link or go to the link for our advocacy form and sign up there. And we look forward to staying engaged with you all. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, if you want any additional resources or information. Highly encourage you all to reach out to any one of us. Thank you so much.